This is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and in this video we're going to continue our study of Homer's Iliad, translated by Alexander Pope. In our last video, I should say, we ended with the goddess's promise to intercede for Achilles as she returned to Mount Olympus. So in this video, we're going to pick up here. You can see that in the book, we're on page 16, and you can see this paragraph that begins, "In Chrysa's port." That's where we're going to pick up with this lesson. And as I said, the last lesson ended with the goddess's promise to go and intercede for Achilles. And so we read, "The goddess spoke, the rolling waves unclose. Then down the steep she plunged from whence she rose back into the sea, and left him, Achilles, sorrowing on the lonely coast in wild resentment for the fair," that is the beautiful girl, "he lost." So that's the end of our last study, and in this reading we're going to pick up here with what follows. And notice the scene changes. In Chrysa's port. So we move from the land where Achilles lives, where he had returned, and now we move to the port where the priest of Apollo is, and we see that Ulysses, and again I've mentioned this before, Ulysses is the Roman name for the Greek Odysseus, whom we'll read about in the Odyssey after we're finished with the Iliad. Ulysses has led this ship to visit Chryses, who is the priest of Apollo, who was the cause. Remember, he was offended by Agamemnon, and he prayed to Apollo, who punished the Greeks. So Ulysses has led a group of Greeks by ship to visit the priest of Apollo and to try and be reconciled to the priest and to the god through the priest. So we're shifting scenes here and now picking up with the Greeks traveling to visit Chryses, the priest of Apollo. So let's read here. In Chrysa's port now sage Ulysses rode. Beneath the deck of the ship, the destined victims, the sacrificial animals, stowed. The sails they furled, the lash they mast aside, and dropped their anchors and the pinnace tied. Next on the shore their hecatomb, that's a whole animal sacrifice, next on the shore their hecatomb they land, Chryseis last descending on the strand. Her, thus returning from the furrowed main, Ulysses led to Phoebus's sacred fane. This is a good illustration here, a good figure of speech. He refers to the furrowed main. The word main refers to the sea, but furrowed is interesting. This image of the furrowed sea leads us to think about a farm where the plow digs and turns over the soil in a straight line. And if you have ever stood and looked at a field that was turned over by an old-fashioned single plow, what those rows are called are furrows. So that land where the plow has dug in and turned the soil over and continued to do so in a straight line across the field, that's called a furrow. And when the ships would sail through the sea, the pointed front of the ship would divide the waters and turn the waters over just as a plow turns over the soil. So they referred to this movement through the sea, or the sea as it was affected by the ship, as the furrowed main. So there's sort of an image of plowing the soil, but thinking of the same thing being done by the ship in the water. So Ulysses led the girl and the sacrifices out to Phoebus's altar, where at his solemn altar, as the maid, he gave to Chryses, her father, thus the hero, that is Ulysses, said. Notice the reverence of Ulysses. And again, we're going to talk about him a great deal in the next book of Homer's, which is the Odyssey, where he's the main character. So it's important for us, as we read the Iliad, to gather as much information as we can about Ulysses, because he's going to be the main character of our next study. So Ulysses shows his respect for religion and for the priest of Apollo here. He says, "Hail, reverend priest, to Phoebus's awful dome, a suppliant," that is, one who asks for mercy, "a suppliant I from great Atrides, the son of Atreus," that is Agamemnon. "A suppliant I from great Atrides come, unransomed. Here receive the spotless fair. Accept this hecatomb the Greeks prepare. And may thy God, who scatters darts around, atoned by sacrifice, desist or stop to wound." So we have this beautiful greeting from Ulysses, where the priest of Phoebus is shown the highest respect. Notice that he says that he returns his daughter unransomed, at no expense to the priest. So when the priest had offered to ransom her, the Greeks here decide to bring her back and accept nothing for her, but to freely return her to the priest. One point in the actual poetry that I'd like to point out here, and remember, this is Homer's Iliad, which was originally composed in Greek, being translated by an English poet, Alexander Pope. And we've talked about the rhyme, the rhythm and the meter of these lines. We've talked about iambic pentameter in our very first lesson. But I want you to notice the rhyming here. Look at these last two lines. "And may thy God, who scatters darts around, atoned by sacrifice, desist to wound." Notice that around and wound are presented to us as rhyming words, and yet they don't rhyme at all in their pronunciation. They rhyme, and I put that in quotation marks, they rhyme in only a visual way. They look similar because they have these same letters, O-U-N-D, O-U-N-D. This is called a visual rhyme. A visual rhyme where the appearance of the words is similar, and it gives an appearance of a rhyme at the end of two lines of a poem. Even though there isn't an audible rhyme, there is a visible rhyme, and you'll see that all throughout this poetry. Just something worth noting and learning about English poetry, the use of visual rhymes. So Ulysses greets Chryses, and presents Chryses to him at no cost with sacrifices to make atonement with Apollo. At this, the sire, that is, the father of the girl, the sire embraced the maid again, so sadly lost, so lately sought in vain. And this could be another example of a visual rhyme, although some people pronounce again as again, and that would make it a regular rhyme. Then near the altar of the darting king, disposed in rank their hecatomb they bring. With water purify their hands. Notice all that we're learning about Greek religion. They have this very Jewish sense of purification and holiness as they prepare sacrifices. With water purify their hands, and take the sacred offering of the salted cake, while thus with arms devoutly raised in air and solemn voice the priest directs his prayer. And he says, God of the silver bow, that is Apollo, God of the silver bow, thy ear incline, whose power encircles Scylla the divine, whose sacred eye thy Tenedos surveys, and gilds fair Crissa with distinguished rays. Remember that Apollo was seen as represented by the sun, and as the sun travels around the world in Greek cosmology or their natural philosophy, the image is that as the sun shines in every place, it is as if the eye or the presence of the god Apollo is in every place. That's why he refers to whose sacred eye thy Tenedos surveys, and gilds fair Crissa with distinguished rays. If, fired to vengeance, at thy priest's request, thy direful darts inflict the raging pest, once more attend or listen, avert the wasteful woe, and smile propitious, and unbend thy bow. So Chryses prayed. Now notice the reverence even with which Chryses makes his prayer. If it was my request, he says, that you turned against the Greeks and punished them, then please hear me a second time as I ask you to desist or relent or stop punishing them. So you can see that even the priest addresses the god in a respectful way, asking him to listen to his prayer and end this punishment of the Greeks. So Chryses prayed, Apollo heard his prayer, and now the Greeks their hecatomb prepare. Between their horns the salted barley threw, and with their heads to heaven the victims slew. Now this is great because we get to learn details of an ancient religious sacrifice, what they did, how it worked, what they thought about it, and so on. With their heads to heaven the victims slew. The limbs they sever from the enclosing hide or skin. The thighs selected to the gods divide. On these in double calls involved with art, the choicest morsels lay from every part. So they butchered this sacrifice and cut it up as if it was being prepared for a meal. The priest himself before his altar stands and burns the offering with his holy hands, pours the black wine and sees the flames aspire. The youth with instruments surround the fire. The thighs thus sacrificed and entrails dressed, the assistants to the priest, the assistants part, transfix, and roast the rest. So they sacrifice this animal, and then they place it into the fire to cook it. They roast this sacrifice. Then spread the tables, the repast prepare. Each takes his seat, and each receives his share. So what's interesting is at this sacrifice, those who offered the sacrifice and the priests who celebrated the sacrifice actually ate part of the sacrifice as part of the celebration of the sacrifice. You can see how the sharing of this sacrificial meal between the suppliants, or the ones who were asking for mercy, and the priest and the priest's assistants was a sign of a reconciliation between the men and the god. Peace is restored through this sacrifice, and they sit down and they enjoy a meal together after peace has been restored. Each takes his seat and each receives his share. When now the rage of hunger was repressed, with pure libations, that means offerings of drinks that they would pour out in sacrifice, with pure libations they conclude the feast. The youths, with wine, the copious goblets crowned, and pleased, dispense the flowing bowls around. With hymns divine, the joyous banquet ends. So they sing ancient hymns to the gods. The paeans lengthened till the sun descends. The Greeks restored, the grateful notes prolong. Apollo listens and approves the song. 'Twas night. The chiefs beside their vessel lie, till rosy morn had purpled o'er the sky. Then launch, that is, they set back out to sea, and hoist the mast, indulgent gales, supplied by Phoebus. So Phoebus blesses their travel home by directing the winds to assist them. Indulgent gales supplied by Phoebus fill the swelling sails. The milk-white canvas bellying as they blow, the parted ocean foams and roars below. Above the bounding billows, here you have an example of alliteration, the repetition of the sound of the letter B. Above the bounding billows, swift they flew, till now the Grecian camp appeared in view. So they see their Greek land, where the Greek soldiers were. Far on the beach they haul their bark, that's another name for ship, their bark to land. The crooked keel divides the yellow sand. Then part, where stretched along the winding bay the ships and tents in mingled prospect lay. So this Greek ship loaded with Greek soldiers who brought sacrifices and the girl Chrysa back to her father have reconciled the Greeks to Apollo, and they return to where they came from. And now this scene shifts again, back to Achilles. But raging still, amidst his navy sat the stern Achilles, steadfast in his hate. Now we might say, well, what's going on here? Because Achilles is against the Greeks, and yet Apollo was just reconciled to the Greeks and seems to be favorable to the Greeks. So now is Achilles just doing this on his own? Is he opposed to everyone? And the answer is no. When we look at Greek religion, there can be 10 different things going on at once, and there can be different gods involved in different parts of different events. So there can still be bad things going on while good things go on someplace else. The Greeks can be reconciled to Apollo, but yet there are other issues involving other gods going on at the same time. So just because one god has been appeased, that doesn't mean that all is well for the Greeks. The stern Achilles, steadfast, continuing in his hate, nor mixed in combat, nor in counsel joined, so staying by himself, but wasting cares that wear him down. Wasting cares lay heavy on his mind. In his black thoughts, revenge and slaughter roll, and scenes of blood rise dreadful in his soul. So we see this anger, this wrath of Achilles, just stewing inside of him. 12 days were past, and now the dawning light the gods had summoned to the Olympian height. So we're moving now, the scene of the story, as it were, is changing again from Achilles sitting there burning in this hatred and anger. And we now shift to the council of the gods to see what's going on among the gods. So again, pay attention, because here we get an insight into Greek religion. The gods had summoned to the Olympian height. Jove, first ascending from the watery bowers, leads the long order of ethereal powers, when, like the morning mist in early day, rose from the flood the daughter of the sea, and to the seats divine her flight addressed, there far apart and high above the rest, the Thunderer sat, where old Olympus shrouds his 100 heads in heaven and props the clouds. Suppliant, that is, asking for mercy, suppliant, the goddess stood. One hand she placed beneath his beard, and one his knees embraced. So imagine Jupiter sitting on his great throne as God of gods, and the goddess comes to him, and she kneels down, and we have this image of him sitting on his throne, and her kneeling before him with one hand under his chin, and her other hand embracing his knee. So sitting close to him, looking up at his face, and she prays as follows. So this is an example of intercession among the Greek gods. If e'er, O Father of the gods, she said, my words could please thee, or my actions aid, some marks of honor on my son bestow, and pay in glory what in life you owe. So remember the prophecy concerning Achilles, that he would live a short life, but would be given glory in that short life. She's praying, remember the promise that was made to my son and fulfill it for him. Let him enjoy the glory that is owed to him. Pay in glory what in life you owe. Fame is at least by heavenly promise due to life so short, and now dishonored too. Avenge this wrong, O ever just and wise. Let Greece be humbled, and the Trojans rise. So notice that she prays that Jupiter would actually give success to the Trojan army and allow them to have success against the Greeks, so that Achilles would be glorified. Let Greece be humbled, and the Trojans rise, till the proud king and all the Achaean race, until Agamemnon and all the Greeks shall heap with honors him they now disgrace. So the goddess Thetis asks Jupiter to cause the Greeks to struggle so that they learn to honor Achilles. Thus Thetis spoke, but Jove in silence held, the sacred counsels of his breast concealed. Not so repulsed, the goddess closer pressed, still grasped his knees, and urged the dear request. So we see an example here of persistence in prayer. She sees that Jupiter doesn't respond favorably right away, and so she continues to beg for his help. O sire of gods and men, thy suppliant hear, refuse or grant, for what has Jove to fear? Or, declare of all the powers above, is wretched Thetis least the care of Jove? So Thetis pleads with Jupiter and says, do you not love me? Am I loved less than all others, that you won't listen to my prayer for help? She said, and sighing, thus the god replies, who rolls the thunder o'er the vaulted skies. So this is Jupiter. So this is our first opportunity to learn about the character of Jupiter himself, the god of the gods, according to the Greeks. He says, what hast thou asked? Ah, Why should Jove engage in foreign contests and domestic rage? What is this to me and to you? He responds the way Jesus responds to Mary when there is no wine at the wedding feast of Cana. What is this to us? Why should Jove engage in foreign contests and domestic rage, household disputes? The gods' complaints and Juno's fierce alarms, while I, too partial, aid the Trojan arms. Go, lest the haughty partner of my sway with jealous eyes thy close access survey. So what Jupiter says to Thetis is that his wife, Juno, the goddess Juno, loves the Greeks, and she's going to get angry if she sees Jupiter talking to Thetis, because she would know that Thetis is up to something if she's speaking quietly and privately with Jupiter. So Jupiter says to Thetis, you better get out of here before Juno finds out. Go, lest the haughty partner of my sway with jealous eyes thy close access survey. But part in peace. Secure, thy prayer is sped. Witness the sacred honors of our head, the nod that ratifies the will divine, the faithful, fixed, irrevocable sign. This seals thy suit, and this fulfills thy vows. And so Jupiter says to Thetis that he will do it. He will answer her prayer and help her, and fulfill his promise to give Achilles glory, even though Juno's going to be mad about this. So he tells Thetis, you better get out of here before you cause some trouble. Now, when we see these relationships between the gods, we see Jupiter talking about Juno and things like that. This is the image of the gods and goddesses that made the philosopher Plato angry with the poets. Plato thought that the poets misrepresented the gods and made them act in a way that wasn't respectable. So the poets were often criticized by the philosophers for presenting religion in a way that doesn't promote respect or piety. That's why in Plato's Republic, when Plato talks about building the perfect state or the perfect country, he forbids any poets to enter the Republic because he believes they have a bad effect on the people, just as we would say a movie or music may have a bad effect on children. If the religious teaching isn't perfect, it becomes a source of disrespect or impiety. And we can see here, referring to Juno as being jealous, having this sort of private discussion between Jupiter and Thetis and saying, you better be careful because Juno's crazy and she's going to get angry. You can see how this presents the gods in a way that's not really respectable. And this is what the philosophers opposed in the poets. They thought that they took too much liberty in talking about the gods in a loose way for the sake of the story, and really encouraged disrespect among the people for religion. So anyway, Jupiter agrees to honor the prayer of Thetis and help her. He spoke, and awful bends his sable brows, shakes his ambrosial curls, and gives the nod. So by giving the nod of his head, he agrees to fulfill the prayer, and Thetis can go away certain that it shall be fulfilled. The stamp of fate and sanction of the god, high heaven with trembling the dread signal took, and all Olympus to the center shook. So when Jupiter nods his head, it's a big deal. And all of the other gods and goddesses are not aware of what just happened, but they see him nodding his head as if to agree to do something, and no one is sure what he's just agreed to do. Swift to the seas, profound, that means deep. Swift to the seas profound the goddess flies, Jove to his starry mansions in the skies. The shining synod, the council of the immortals of the gods and goddesses, the shining synod of the immortals wait, the coming God, and from their thrones of state, arising silent, wrapped in holy fear, before the majesty of heaven appear. Trembling they stand, while Jove assumes the throne. All but the gods' imperious queen alone. Notice how they present Juno in a way that's not respectable. Anytime we read of the ideal wife in ancient literature, we read of a respectful, obedient, helpful, loving, supportive woman who stands beside her husband. And yet here we have the relationship of the greatest of the gods, Jupiter and Juno, as something of a bad relationship. Juno is sort of a troublesome, quarrelsome woman. And again, this is what made the philosophers angry with the poets. All of the gods and goddesses assembled on Mount Olympus except for Jupiter's wife, Juno. Late had she viewed the silver-footed dame, so Juno saw Thetis. Late had she viewed the silver-footed dame, and all her passions kindled into flame. So we see this emotional goddess. All her passions kindled into flame. Say, artful manager of heaven, she cries, who now partakes the secrets of the skies? Thy Juno knows not the decrees of fate, in vain the partner of imperial state. So Juno's complaining that she's not in on what's going on. Why is Jupiter keeping secrets from her? Who now partakes the secrets of the skies, she says. Thy Juno, thy wife Juno knows not the decrees of fate, and in vain the partner of imperial state. What favorite goddess then those cares divides, which Jove in prudence from his consort, from his wife, hides? What are you hiding? What's going on here? And then Jupiter responds. To this, the Thunderer says to Juno, seek not thou to find the sacred counsels of Almighty Mind. Involved in darkness lies the great decree, nor can the depths of fate be pierced by thee. What fits thy knowledge, thou the first shalt know, the first of gods above, and men below, but thou nor they shall search the thoughts that roll deep in the close recesses of my soul. So Jupiter responds to Juno and says, none of your business. You're not the sovereign here. I'll tell you what you need to know, and there are things that you don't need to know. So stay in your lane, he says to Juno. Mind your own business. I'm the sovereign here. Full on, the sire, the goddess of the skies, rolled the large orbs of her majestic eyes, and thus returned. Austere Saturnius, say, from whence this wrath, or who controls thy sway? Thy boundless will for me remains in force, and all thy counsels take the destined course. But 'tis for Greece I fear. So Juno is concerned about the Greeks. This is her concern. 'Tis for Greece I fear, for late was seen in close consult the silver-footed queen. I'm concerned about the Greeks because I saw Thetis in close conversation with you. And that makes me nervous because I'm concerned about the Greeks, and I know what's going on, and I know that she's the mother of Achilles, and I saw you consent to something, and I'm afraid to know what it was that you agreed to. Jove to his Thetis nothing could deny, nor was the signal vain that shook the sky. What fatal favor has the goddess won? To grace her fierce, inexorable son? Perhaps in Grecian blood to drench the plain, and glut his vengeance with my people slain? So Juno knows exactly what's going on, and she's demanding to know what Jupiter had agreed to with Thetis, the mother of Achilles. Then, thus the god. So Jupiter responds to Juno. O restless fate of pride that strives to learn what heaven resolves to hide. Notice here the use of heaven as a name to refer to the god Jupiter himself. That's a figure of speech. Vain is thy search, presumptuous and abhorred, anxious to thee and odious to thy Lord. Let this suffice. The immutable decree no force can shake. What is, that ought to be. What is, that ought to be. Goddess, submit, nor dare our will withstand, but dread the power of this avenging hand. The united strength of all the gods above in vain resists the omnipotence of Jove. So Jupiter answers Juno with very strong words and says, all of the gods and goddesses together, if they didn't agree with the will of Jupiter, could do nothing about it. The united strength of all the gods above in vain resists the omnipotence of Jove. So again, we're learning a lot about Greek religion here. We're learning that Jupiter was believed to be omnipotent. He was the great king of all the gods. And again, we're just speaking about Greek religion. So don't get into any comparison with Christianity here, because Christianity is not even present in Greece at the time Homer wrote this. But they believed that there was a single omnipotent God, Jupiter, and that he had power beyond that of all of the other gods combined, and his will was always to be done, and it wasn't even necessarily known to the other gods or goddesses. The thunderer spoke, nor durst the queen reply. She knew to hold her peace at this point. He warned her clearly. The thunderer spoke, nor durst the queen reply. Now, let me just say something more about this image of Juno, because this is important in religion. In Christianity, what we believe is that God is perfect. God is perfect and man is corrupt. And what it means for man to be justified or redeemed is for man to learn to imitate the perfect character of God. When we look at the Greek gods, we find something very different. We don't find an image of perfect gods who are to be imitated by men. We find the weaknesses of men applied to the gods. So a man and woman famously get into quarrels in their marriage, and it's sort of joked about that men and women can't get together, and married couples fight all the time and things like that. And so in Greek religion, when we look up to the gods, we find the same imperfections, the same problems present among the gods. It's as if the gods imitate men, rather than having perfect gods whom men are to imitate. Gods have the same problems that men have. And this, again, this is what philosophers like Plato objected to. They said that this kind of teaching, where the gods are presented and shown to have all kinds of human imperfections, this was actually false teaching about the gods, and the poets were condemned for these stories. It's important to note these things. The thunderer spoke, and nor durst the queen reply. A reverent horror silenced all the sky. The feast of the gods disturbed, with sorrow Vulcan saw. Vulcan is the god who is the great blacksmith of the gods. He is also referred to in Greek as Hephaestus. So Vulcan is the Roman name for this god who is also known as Hephaestus. The feast disturbed with sorrow Vulcan saw. His mother, Juno, menaced, and the gods in awe. Peace at his heart and pleasure his design, thus interposed the architect divine. You see, Vulcan or Hephaestus was the divine builder or the architect of the gods. So he speaks here in this situation. The wretched quarrels of the mortal state are far unworthy, gods, of your debate. So interestingly, Vulcan comments here. Homer has Vulcan comment and say this kind of quarreling between a husband and his wife is not proper for the gods. It's unworthy of the gods. The wretched quarrels of the mortal state are far unworthy, gods, of your debate. Let men their days in senseless strife employ, we in eternal peace and constant joy. Thou, goddess mother, with our sire comply, nor break the sacred union of the sky, lest, roused to rage, he shake the blessed abodes, launch the red lightning, and dethrone the gods. If you submit, the thunderer stands appeased. The gracious power is willing to be pleased. So Vulcan advises his mother to end this quarrel and submit to Jupiter, his father. Thus Vulcan spoke, and rising with a bound, the double bowl with sparkling nectar crowned, which held to Juno in a cheerful way, Goddess, he cried, be patient and obey. Dear as you are, if Jove his arm extend, I can but grieve, unable to defend. What god so daring in your aid to move would lift his hand against the force of Jove? Once in your cause I felt his matchless might, hurled headlong down from the ethereal height, tossed all the day in rapid circles round, nor till the sun descended touched the ground. Breathless I fell, in giddy motion lost, the Cynthians raised me on the Lemnian coast. So Vulcan says, there was a time when Jupiter punished me. I can remember that day. He threw me right out of here. He said this, and to her hands the goblet heaved, so he offers her a drink, which with a smile the white-armed queen received. Then to the rest he filled, and in his turn each to his lips applied the nectared urn. Vulcan with awkward grace his office plies, and unextinguished laughter shakes the skies. Thus the blessed gods the genial day prolong in feasts ambrosial and celestial song. Apollo tuned the lyre, the Muses round with voice alternate aid the silver sound. Meantime the radiant sun to mortal sight, descending swift, rolled down the rapid light. Then to the starry domes the gods depart, the shining monuments of Vulcan's art. Jove on his couch reclined his awful head, and Juno slumbered on the golden bed. So there's peace here, and you see we come to the end of Book 1. So here in this last scene, there's a quarrel. Well, let me start by saying Thetis, the mother of Achilles, comes to Jupiter to intercede for Achilles. She asks Jupiter to honor the promise that was given to her son, that in exchange for short life he would win glory. Jupiter agrees to fulfill the prayer of Thetis. Juno is upset because Juno loves the Greeks, and she knows that Jupiter just agreed to do something for Thetis, and she thinks she knows what it is. And so Juno quarrels with Jupiter, but Jupiter sets her down and tells her to obey. Vulcan then, the son of Juno, comes and encourages his mother to be quiet and be obedient, and to let peace reign among the gods. Let not the quarrels of mortals come up here into the peaceful assembly of the gods, and Juno agrees. And when Book 1 ends, there's peace. There's peace between the Greeks and Apollo. There's peace between Jupiter and Juno. There's peace between Jupiter and Thetis, and even Achilles is going to be pleased to learn of the gods' decision. And so here we come to the end of Book 1. Now, it's taken us 6 or maybe 7 videos to get through Book 1, but as I said, we would move slowly in the beginning because things just take time. And even in this video, you can see we're moving along much more quickly now. In our next video, we'll continue into Book 2 and go on through the rest of the Iliad, God willing, and through other books of classical literature as well. I hope this is a helpful guide. If there's anything in the reading that you're uncertain about and would like to have cleared up for you, just get in touch by posting on the student forum on the course page in the study center, or by contacting me by email. I hope that's helpful. God bless your studies.